December 1943. A German fighter pilot spared a damaged American bomber flying over Germany. 10 men survived that day because of his decision. Both pilots went home and never mentioned it again. For 43 years, Charlie Brown lived with a single question. Who was that man? The German pilot who met his eyes and chose compassion over killing. The one who risked death to save strangers. In 1986, Charlie Brown began to search. 4 years of frustration followed. Hundreds of letters, endless phone calls. Then, in January 1990, a message arrived from Canada. 4 simple words. I was the one. This is the story of how 2 enemies became brothers. Charlie Brown reached England on December 20th, 1943. His B-17, Ye Olde Pub, landed at RAF Seething with 11 injured men aboard, 1 already dead. The aircraft was so torn apart it never flew again. Ground crews couldn't believe it had stayed in the air. During debriefing, Charlie told his commanders what had happened. A German fighter had guided them to safety. The reaction was swift. Never speak of this again. Don't tell your crew. Don't tell other pilots. If word spread that German airmen could show mercy, it could create dangerous sympathy. The rule was clear. You couldn't be human and still fly in that war. So Charlie kept quiet. He finished his missions, returned home to West Virginia, went to college, rejoined the Air Force in 1949, and served until 1965. Later, he became a Foreign Service officer, traveling to Laos and Vietnam, before retiring in 1972 and moving to Miami as an inventor. He built a good life, raised a family, but he never forgot. His daughter would later describe her father's nightmares, how he'd wake drenched in sweat. The war had never truly left him. Beneath the trauma and battle memories, one image always remained. The German pilot in the Bf 109 flying beside them. Franz Stigler also stayed silent. After landing near Bremen, having escorted the B-17 to safety, he said nothing to his superiors. What he had done was treason in Nazi Germany, punishable by death. Sparing an enemy plane was a crime. If anyone discovered he'd deliberately let 10 Americans live, he'd be executed. So Franz carried the secret through the rest of the war. He endured Germany's collapse, the chaos of surrender and occupation. In 1953, he immigrated to Canada, married, and became a successful businessman. He too built a new life. He too tried to forget. But the memory of that day in December 1943 stayed with him. The B-17 with holes ripped through its frame. The wounded men fighting to stay alive. The young pilot meeting his eyes through shattered glass. Franz would later say he lost his desire for medals that day. He stopped chasing victory counts. The sight of that broken bomber changed him deeply. Both men held that memory in silence for decades. A meeting that lasted maybe 10 minutes had marked them forever. 1986, Boston, a reunion of combat pilots called Gathering of the Eagles. Charlie Brown, now 64, a retired Air Force colonel living in Miami, attended. Boeing had invited veterans to celebrate the B-17's 50th anniversary. During the event, someone asked if he'd ever flown a mission he'd never forget. He told the story, the crippled bomber, the German escort, the silent salute. Afterward, people crowded around him. How had he never searched for that pilot? Who was he? Did he survive the war? Charlie realized he'd carried that question for 43 years without ever truly seeking the answer. He decided he had to find him. He started by reaching out through official channels, contacting the U.S. Air Force, writing to West German archives, requesting records from the Army Air Force's historians. Surely, someone had files on German pilots near Bremen in December 1943. Months went by, then years. Records were missing, destroyed, or still classified. Every lead ended in failure. Germany's archives had been scattered after the war. Many Luftwaffe files lost or seized by the Soviets. Finding one specific pilot from one winter's day in 1943 was almost impossible. But Charlie couldn't let go. The nightmares continued. He'd wake drenched in sweat, remembering the flak, the dying crew, and always that question: who was the German pilot? In 1989, Charlie tried another way. He wrote a full account of the incident and sent it to a newsletter read by both American and German veterans. He described the date, the location, the Bf-109's markings, every detail he remembered. He mentioned one thing in particular. The German pilot had looked him in the eyes and saluted before flying away. Charlie mailed the letter and waited. He was 67 years old now. More than 46 years had passed since that day over Germany. The German pilot could have died in the war or long after, but Charlie still had to try. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, Canada, Franz Stigler was 74 years old. Franz had also attended Boeing's 50th anniversary celebration in 1986, the only German pilot there. A local TV crew interviewed him, and he told his story: the B-17 he'd spared, the decision he made, the risk he'd taken. For years, Franz had quietly searched too. He wanted to know if the bomber had ever made it back, if its crew had lived. He reached out to old Luftwaffe associations, asked at veteran reunions, but no one knew anything. Then, in January 1990, Franz saw Charlie's letter printed in a combat pilot newsletter. He read it carefully. The date, the location, the events, everything lined up. After 47 years, Franz finally learned the B-17 crew had survived. They'd made it home. Franz sat down and wrote a letter, sending it to Charlie Brown in Miami, Florida, on January 18, 1990. Charlie opened an envelope from Canada. Inside was a simple message: I was the one. When Charlie and Franz spoke for the first time on the phone, Franz described his plane, every detail Charlie needed to confirm this was the same German pilot from December 20th, 1943. Franz explained that when he flew beside the battered B-17 and saw the gaping holes, the wounded men still trying to help each other, he'd remembered his old commander, Gustav Rudel, who once told him, "If I ever catch you shooting at a man in a parachute, I'll shoot you myself." To Franz, those men in the broken bombers were no different from men drifting down in parachutes. They were defenseless. They posed no threat. Killing them would have been murder, not combat. Franz told Charlie he had tried to guide them to land in Germany or divert toward neutral Sweden, where they could get medical help. But the Americans kept heading for England, so he escorted them through German anti-air defenses to keep them safe. As they talked, something changed inside both men. Charlie's nightmares began to fade. The question that had haunted him for nearly 50 years finally had an answer. And more than that, it had a name, a voice, a living man on the other end of the line. For Franz, hearing Charlie's voice meant everything. For nearly half a century, he had wondered whether his act had mattered, if the bomber had crashed into the North Sea, or if the crew had died before making it home. Now he knew. They had lived. All 10 men had survived that flight. The two decided to meet in person. 6 months later, they reunited in Seattle. A camera captured the moment. Franz stepped out of a car, saw Charlie, and ran to hug him. 2 former enemies held each other and cried. Then Franz turned to the camera and quietly said, "I love you, Charlie." They spent the day talking, filling in the missing years. Charlie introduced Franz to the other surviving crew members, men who were alive because of Franz's decision that day. Franz met their children and grandchildren, families who existed because one pilot had chosen mercy. The meeting was deeply healing for both men. Charlie said his nightmares vanished after finding Franz. Franz said that meeting Charlie and his crew was the only good thing that came from the war. He had lost his brother in combat. He had seen the Luftwaffe lose over 90% of its pilots. He had watched his country destroyed. But saving those men, that was something he could be proud of. After 1990, Charlie and Franz became inseparable. They spoke weekly on the phone. They traveled across America together, appearing at air shows and veteran gatherings, sharing their story with civic groups and organizations. On one visit, Franz handed Charlie a book. Inside, he had written, "In 1940, I lost my only brother as a night fighter. Thanks, Charlie. Your brother, Franz." Their families grew close as well. Charlie's wife and Franz's wife became friends. The connection extended beyond the two men to everyone around them. Not everyone understood. Franz received angry calls from Germany, calling him a traitor for sparing American bombers. Some of his Canadian neighbors called him a Nazi. Franz's reply was always the same. They'll never understand. For Franz and Charlie, titles meant nothing. German or American, foe or friend, those were just words from a war long ended. What mattered was what happened on December the 20th, 1943, when one man looked at another and chose humanity over hatred. Their friendship lasted 18 years. On March 22, 2008, Franz Stigler passed away in Vancouver, Canada. He was 92. 8 months later, on November 24, 2008, Charlie Brown died in Miami, Florida, at the age of 86. They're buried thousands of miles apart, yet their story remains forever bound together. Two men who met for 10 minutes in combat in 1943 became brothers for the final 18 years of their lives. Their story became a book, A Higher Call, written with the help of authors who documented every moment. The book became a bestseller, sharing their story with millions who'd never heard it before. But the true legacy isn't the fame, the book, or the honors they received late in life. The real legacy is what Franz Stigler proved, that even in war, compassion can win, that you can wear the uniform of an enemy and still recognize the humanity on the other side. 47 years to find each other. 18 years together, both gone within 8 months, as if one couldn't exist without the other. This isn't just a war story. It's a story about what it truly means to be human.